Have you ever really thought about what makes someone who they are deep down? I'm not talking about the person you see on the surface, the one they present at work or at parties. I'm talking about the person behind the smile, behind the handshake. From the person you love the most to the person you admire from afar, and yes, even the person staring back at you in the mirror. If you really want to see someone's true, unshakable character, you only need to pay attention to two things: how they treat others when they have power, and how they respond when they are in pain. These two moments, these two windows into the soul, will show you more than years of conversations ever could. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you won't just understand other people better, you're going to understand yourself on a much, much deeper level. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? If you really want to see who someone is, don't just watch them when they're struggling. Watch them when they are strong. It's not just adversity that reveals a person. Power is just as revealing, and sometimes it's even more telling. You see, there's a certain grace that comes with struggle. When you're at your lowest, humility tends to follow you around like a shadow. You have to rely on other people. You learn to listen more carefully. You tread lightly because your survival really depends on it. But what happens when someone is lifted up? When they step into a position of influence, of leadership, when the crowds start to cheer and the world seems to bow to them? That's when the real test of character begins. Because power doesn't always corrupt people. Sometimes it just reveals what was hiding inside them all along. There's a story about a young man named Leo who grew up in a poor village. He had humble beginnings, always helping his mother with chores, always saying thank you to the elders. He was known for being gentle and kind. Then one day, through years of hard work and discipline, he rose to a high position in the government. At first, people praised him. They'd say, "Look, he remembers where he came from." But then after a few months, something started to shift. He stopped making eye contact with the janitors. He walked past the homeless man on the corner who he used to share food with. He started interrupting the elders in meetings. Power hadn't changed him. It had unmasked him. You have to understand the way someone treats another person when they don't need their approval. That's when you see the truth of their spirit, because respect that's born out of necessity is not the same as respect that is born out of self-discipline. True respect, true humility, it's there no matter what your job title is. Just think about how a manager treats their team. A good leader isn't the one who just barks orders and gets results through fear. A true leader is the one who, even when they have all the authority to command, chooses to guide instead. They're the one who notices the person who's been quiet all week in the meetings. They're the one who gives credit to the team in public, but takes responsibility for mistakes in private. For a leader like that, power doesn't inflate their ego. It deepens their commitment to serve others. And this isn't just about the workplace. You see it in families too. How does a parent who is obviously stronger and holds all the power treat their child? Do they speak with tenderness, or do they rule with intimidation? You see it in relationships. How does one partner, maybe the one who earns more money or has more social influence, treat the other when it's time to make a decision? Is it a collaboration, or is it control? The great philosopher Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." But it's not about how much power he gets or how loud he can shout, but what he actually does with that authority. Because power is like water. It takes the shape of whatever container it's poured into. And if the heart is cracked, that power will just leak out as arrogance or cruelty or just plain indifference. There's a story from ancient China about a general who was given command over a huge territory. His predecessor had ruled with an iron fist, and a sense of fear hung over the entire region like a thick fog. But this new general decided to lead differently. He went to every town square and just listened to people's complaints. He shared meals with the poor. He visited families who had lost loved ones in the war. When one of his advisors asked him, "Why are you so humble when you have so much authority?" the general responded, "Because those who carry weapons must also carry compassion. Power without empathy is just tyranny." So, ask yourself, who do you become when you're elevated? When you have the right to choose, the freedom to act, the status to demand, what do you do with it? And maybe even more importantly, watch for this in others. When someone finds success, how do they treat the people who aren't in the spotlight with them? Do they still remember the names of the people who helped them on their way up? Do they still hold the door for others, or do they now wait for someone to open it for them? There's something deeply spiritual about watching someone who has every right in the world to boast, but chooses to bless instead. Someone who could command silence with a single look, but instead chooses to listen. That isn't weakness, that is mastery. In the monastery, the elders often say, "The loudest gong is the one that is hollow inside." It makes a big sound, sure, but it has no depth. In the same way, people who let power swell their ego are just revealing that they haven't cultivated any inner stillness. True character doesn't need to scream for attention. It speaks softly because it doesn't need to be heard to feel important. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin, where power reveals what's inside you. When the world is at your feet, pain reveals what's inside you when your world is falling apart. Pain is a sacred teacher. It doesn't knock politely on the door, it breaks the door down. It doesn't whisper, it howls. And in those moments when you're hurting, when you're disoriented, maybe even ashamed, you are forced to confront parts of yourself that you've kept buried for a long time. But here's the absolute truth. What you do with that pain is what defines you. Some people, when they're in pain, they become cruel. They lash out. They carry their wounds around like weapons, striking other people, because they haven't found the strength to simply sit with their own suffering. They confuse being loud with healing. They become the very thing that hurt them, hoping that somehow getting revenge will feel like justice. But vengeance isn't healing. It's just a performance of power when you have no inner peace. There's this powerful image from the Japanese art of kintsugi. When a ceramic bowl breaks, instead of throwing it away, the artisans repair it using gold lacquer. The cracks aren't hidden, they are highlighted. The bowl becomes more beautiful and more valuable, not in spite of being broken, but because it was broken and then restored with intention. So it is with the human soul. You can meet someone who has been betrayed, but instead of building walls around their heart, they built wisdom. You can meet someone who has lost everything, but instead of drowning in bitterness, they chose to deepen their empathy for others. These people didn't let pain define them. They let it refine them. Think of a mother who loses her child, but still finds it in her heart to comfort other grieving mothers. Think of a man who was wrongly imprisoned for years, but instead of becoming hardened and angry, he uses his experience to fight for a better justice system. These aren't just good people. They are transformed people. They've done the hardest thing imaginable. They've made meaning out of their suffering. There's a famous quote from Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust. He said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." That is the invitation of pain. It's not asking you to fight fire with fire. It's asking you to walk through the flame and come out the other side, forged into something stronger. In the temple, when students face physical exhaustion, mental fatigue, and emotional breakdowns, they are taught one simple thing: sit. Just sit. Don't run from it. Don't distract yourself. Don't deny it. Because it's only in that stillness that you can hear the wisdom that pain is trying to teach you. It's only in that stillness that you can choose how you will respond. One student, after failing his martial arts test for the third time, stormed out of the courtyard. He was so angry he refused to speak to anyone for days. Finally, he came back and asked the master, "Why does pain have to be part of our path?" The master replied, "Because without it, your ego would be your only teacher." Pain humbles you. It forces you to look at yourself. It pushes you to stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" Not, "What did I lose?" but "What can I learn?" The shift is so subtle, but it's incredibly powerful. It changes you from being a victim to being a vessel, from someone who just suffers to someone who transforms. And let's be clear, not all pain is noble. Some of it is inflicted by unjust systems, by betrayal, by evil. But even then, your response is your canvas. You can't always choose your suffering, but you can always choose what meaning you make from it. And when you meet someone who is going through a hard time, listen not just to what they say, but watch how they live. Do they isolate themselves, or do they reach out? Do they seek to understand their pain, or do they try to spread their suffering to others? You'll notice that people who are truly aware of their pain tend to carry themselves with a quiet dignity. Not silence, but dignity. Because they have faced the shadows within themselves and have emerged with a little more light. They don't need to prove how strong they are. Their survival through the fire is proof enough. On the other hand, people who avoid their pain often try to control others. They raise their voices not because they are powerful, but because they are terrified. They demand control over everything, not because they are strong, but because deep inside they feel completely powerless. This is why pain is such a great revealer of character. It's not about the hurt itself, but in how that hurt is handled. And so, between these two great forces, power and pain, we are given two mirrors. One mirror shows us how we hold others when we rise. The other shows us how we hold ourselves when we fall. If someone passes the test of power, but fails the test of pain, their character is incomplete. If someone survives their pain but then abuses their power, their transformation has been corrupted. You have to watch for both. And you, dear listener, are being invited to look at both, not just in other people, but in yourself. What do you do when people are watching you? And what do you do when they're not? Who do you become when you are praised? And who do you become when you are broken? The answers to those questions, they reveal the soul behind your smile. There's something absolutely fascinating about the way people treat those they believe are beneath them. I'm not just talking about how they interact with people who don't have any influence. I'm talking about how they regard the silent ones, the unseen ones, the ones who can't possibly do them any favors in return. You see, if you want to know someone's true character, don't look at how they treat their boss. Watch how they treat the janitor. Don't just observe how they speak to the people who can give them a promotion. Listen to how they address the person who can't do anything for them at all. This third lens, how someone treats people who are of no advantage to them, might seem like a simple test, but it cuts right to the very root of integrity. Because we live in a world that is so conditioned by transactions. What can you give me? What can I get from you? How can you help me get ahead? In a world like that, genuine no-strings-attached kindness has become one of the rarest currencies. It's often only offered when it comes with a good return on investment, but character, real grounded, cultivated character operates from a completely different motivation. It sees human dignity not as something you earn through status, but as something that is inherent in just being alive. It knows that every single person carries a story, every soul carries unseen battles, and that even the quietest presence deserves to be treated with basic decency. There's a story of a renowned CEO named Sarah, known for her innovation and leadership. But what truly set her apart wasn't something you'd find in a boardroom or a quarterly report. It was in the small things. It was in the way she greeted the security guard by name every single morning. It was how she'd ask the cleaning staff about their families. It was how, when one of the cafeteria workers was hospitalized, she showed up quietly and paid the medical bill. Not because it would ever make the news, not because anyone would praise her for it, but because in her eyes, a person's position didn't determine their value. Their presence did. Now contrast that with the executive who walks into a room and never once looks up from their phone, who ignores the waitress unless it's to complain about something, who greets their powerful colleagues with big smiles, but treats their Uber driver as if they're invisible. This isn't just about bad manners. It's about the orientation of the heart, because when respect is selective, it reveals that it's not actually respect at all. It's a calculation. Children see this more than we realize. A child doesn't just listen to what you say, they absorb how you live. When they see you speak one way to someone in power and a completely different way to someone in need, they learn a dangerous lesson that a person's value is conditional. But when they see consistency in your kindness, when they see you treat everyone with the same level of respect, they understand that character isn't something you just put on like a suit for a meeting. It's who you are when you think no one is watching. There's an old proverb that says, "The true measure of a person is how they treat someone who can do nothing for them." Not because those moments are morally impressive, but because they are the most revealing. They show whether your integrity is something that is deeply rooted within you, or something that is just rehearsed for an audience. In the monastery, new students are often given the most menial tasks during their early years: sweeping leaves, washing the temple floors, cleaning up after others. This isn't a punishment, it's a form of purification, because in those moments when there is no glory attached to your effort, when no praise follows your labor, you're forced to meet your true self. Are you still diligent? Are you still respectful? Do you still act with presence and care? Or do you grumble and slack off when you know no applause is coming? One student new to the temple asked the master, after several days of cleaning, "When will I be allowed to begin learning martial arts?" The master looked at him and said, "You already have. With every movement, every sweep of the broom, every breath, you are learning to move without pride. That is the first discipline. And it is so in life. True power is not about who you can impress. It's about how you treat the ones who don't matter in the eyes of the world. The tired cashier at the grocery store, the elderly neighbor who lives alone, the child who's too young to ever praise you. These are the quiet moments where your soul is laid bare. There was a man named David who walked his dog through a local park every morning. Along the path, an elderly woman sat selling flowers. Not many people even noticed her. She didn't speak much, and her stand was very modest. But every single day without fail, David would stop by a single flower and smile. Not because he needed more roses, but because he understood something deeper. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the most profound weight. One day, the woman handed him a small folded note along with the flower. It simply read, "Your kindness is the only reason I keep coming here." And that's the truth most of us forget. You never ever know what your smallest act of kindness can mean to someone else. You never know who is just barely holding on. And if your heart only beats loudly for the powerful, it has not yet learned how to truly love. This lens, watching how people treat those who can't repay them, isn't just about identifying character in others. It's about cultivating it in ourselves. It's about training ourselves to live with open eyes and an open heart, even in a world that often feels closed off. But this brings us to a fourth layer of revelation. The moment when someone is denied what they want. Because it's one thing to be kind when life is flowing your way. It's one thing to be generous when you have plenty of resources. But how does someone behave when the answer is no? When they don't get their way? When a boundary is set and a limit is enforced? This is the realm where entitlement is exposed. You see, character isn't just revealed by how someone uses power, but also by how they respond to a power they cannot control. Rejection, delay, resistance. These are the chisels that chip away at the surface and reveal the truth. Think about a scene that plays out every day in airports around the world. A flight gets delayed. Tension starts to build in the waiting area. You'll see some people who immediately start cursing at the airline staff, shouting in frustration, demanding compensation. Then you'll see others who, though they are visibly disappointed, just take a deep breath, find a seat, and wait. Same circumstance, completely different reaction. What's the difference? Character. Because a crisis doesn't create a person's behavior, it magnifies it. The pressure just makes the inner self visible. It pulls the mask off and shows what was hiding underneath all along. There was a young woman, let's call her Jessica, who was applying for a very competitive job. She had all the qualifications, the charm, the right connections. But when the position was given to someone else, she completely fell apart. She stormed out of the final interview process, wrote harsh things about the organization online, and even tried to sabotage the reputation of the person who was selected. In her mind, she had been robbed of something she was owed. But in truth, her response revealed a mindset that was conditioned to believe that doors must open for her simply because she knocked. And that's a dangerous illusion, to think that your desire automatically equals entitlement. Because no matter how talented you are, no matter how hard you've worked, there will be moments when life says not now, or even not ever. And how you respond in those moments says more about your soul than any success ever will. Rejection is one of the most honest teachers we will ever encounter. It shows us what we truly worship. Do we worship validation, control, and winning? Or do we honor the process itself? There's a story of a monk who trained for years to master a certain difficult skill. He believed that if he could just perform it flawlessly, he would be promoted within the monastery. He practiced endlessly. Finally, the day came, and he presented his skill to the elders. They watched him quietly, then nodded and dismissed him. No promotion, no praise. That night, he sat in his room, angry and confused. Eventually, he went to the oldest master and asked, "Why was I overlooked?" The master replied, "Because you were performing for a position, not for a purpose. Until your heart seeks mastery instead of recognition, your progress will always be incomplete." That truth applies to every single path in life. Whether you're an artist, a teacher, an entrepreneur, or a student, if your peace depends on the applause of others, you will always be a prisoner. If your self-worth dissolves the moment a door closes in your face, you were never standing on solid ground to begin with. So, watch closely how others respond to no. When they are denied something, do they sulk? Do they blame everyone else? Do they retaliate, or do they reflect? The way someone handles rejection reveals whether they have built their identity on expectations or on discipline. Expectation says, "I deserve this." Discipline says, "I will grow from this." One crumbles under denial, the other rises. There is a quiet, unshakable strength in the person who is told no and still walks with dignity. The person who, when all their plans fall apart, still treats people with respect. The person who, even when they are deeply disappointed, chooses not to destroy, but to understand. This strength isn't weakness, it isn't passivity, it is mastery, because it means your emotions do not govern your behavior. Your ego is not sitting in the driver's seat. You are not enslaved by the outcome. You are anchored in your purpose. The most dangerous person in a room isn't the one who always gets what they want. It's the one who remains kind even when they don't, because that person has learned to master themselves. And self-mastery is the foundation of all lasting influence. One of the most powerful examples of this was a man who applied to be on a high-level leadership council in his community. He campaigned ethically, he spoke with clarity, he built trust with people. But in the end, he was not selected. When everyone expected him to lash out or retreat in bitterness, he did neither. Instead, he volunteered to support the new council's efforts. When someone asked him why, he said, "Because I didn't campaign to lead, I campaigned to serve, and service does not require a position." That is the spirit of someone whose character has been shaped not by outcomes, but by intention. So now the question comes back to us. How do we respond when life humbles us? When we're told no, do we become bitter? Do we seek revenge, or do we become deeper? Pain may shape us, yes, but rejection reveals the strength of our root system. If your roots are deep, no storm can uproot you. But if your roots are shallow, even a soft wind of disappointment will be enough to topple your sense of worth. To cultivate an unshakable character, you must be willing to look at both sides of this coin. You must be willing to look at how you treat those who seem to be beneath you, and how you act when you find yourself beneath others. Both reveal who you really are. Not who you say you are, not who you hope you are, but who you truly are when the pressure is on and no one's watching. The journey continues, and with every observation we gather more than just insights. We gather awareness. And awareness is the first breath of transformation. The way someone responds to adversity is often the truest mirror of their inner world. It's easy to look composed and strong when the sun is shining, when the water is still, and the winds are calm. But genuine deep-rooted character reveals itself when the storm finally comes. When plans fall apart, when health declines, when relationships rupture, when our expectations crumble into dust. In those crucible moments, something either rises up from within us or it withers away. Adversity isn't just a challenge to be overcome, it is a revealer of truth. Imagine a man standing at the edge of a cliff watching the horizon. In the distance, a storm begins to gather. He can feel the wind shift, the air grows heavy, and as the first drops of rain begin to fall, every instinct in his body tells him to retreat to find shelter. But instead, he plants his feet firmly on the ground. Not because he's trying to prove something to anyone, but because he knows that life was never meant to be lived only in the sunshine. He knows that every great tree was once a sapling that survived a violent storm. Every great river carved its way through solid rock, and every soul that has any depth was formed in the fire of some trial. We often admire people who appear composed under pressure. We call them strong, resilient, unshakable. But what we often don't see is all the inner work that built that strength. That person didn't just become grounded in the middle of the storm. They were grounded long before it ever arrived. There's a profound story from the world of martial arts. A young disciple had been training for several years in peaceful, perfect conditions. His forms were flawless, his precision was unmatched. But one winter, a sudden flood destroyed part of the temple grounds. The students were all sent to help rebuild. It was cold, they were tired, and they were working in thick mud. And the once graceful student grew irritable. His perfect discipline started to crack. He spoke sharply to the other students. He complained constantly, he resisted the work. The master pulled him aside and said, "You have perfected your movements in silence, but now you must learn to perfect your mind in the noise. Only then will your training be complete." This is the very essence of adversity. It reveals what your internal training has truly accomplished. It is the classroom of the soul, where all our theories are put to the test and all our illusions are stripped away. Many people think that adversity builds character, but a more accurate truth is that adversity reveals it. The character was either there all along, being silently cultivated through thousands of small choices, disciplines, and sacrifices, or it wasn't. The storm merely showed what was or was not already there. Consider the image of a glass filled with a dark liquid. If you bump that glass, what spills out isn't something that was caused by the bump. It's simply what was already inside. In the same way, life will bump every single one of us. The only question is, what spills out? Anger, blame, bitterness, or does patience spill out insight, endurance? There was once a woman named Maria, a single mother of 3 working 2 jobs and just barely managing to stay afloat. One day, without any warning, she lost her primary job. Her rent was due. Her children needed food. Friends offered all kinds of advice. Sue the company, shame them online, go on a public rant, but she chose a different path. She woke up the very next day, packed lunches for her kids, said a quiet prayer, and then went out job hunting. When a friend asked her how she could possibly stay so calm, she said something powerful. She said, "Because if I let my emotions lead right now, I'll lose more than a job. I'll lose myself. My children don't just need food, they need to see a mother who doesn't break under pressure." And that's something we rarely talk about. That in the midst of our own adversity, we're not just living through our own pain. We are shaping the next generation's understanding of what strength really is. When you manage to stand upright through a struggle, you don't just survive. You mentor without ever speaking a word. Adversity introduces us to ourselves. It confronts our expectations. It challenges our deepest beliefs. It strips away the comfort of convenience and asks us, what remains when nothing goes according to plan? Pain is a language that few of us want to learn, but it is a language that always speaks the truth. There is a concept in Zen Buddhism called kensho, which refers to a moment of insight into one's true nature. Interestingly, these moments of profound clarity often arise not during peaceful meditation or times of bliss, but during hardship. When the ego is disarmed, when all pretense dissolves, and when you are just too tired to pretend anymore, it's in those raw, unfiltered spaces that you finally meet the truth of who you are. And it is in that meeting that real transformation begins. One of the monks in a Himalayan monastery shared a profound story. A student had been undergoing a long fast as part of his spiritual discipline, but midway through he became incredibly frustrated. The hunger wasn't bringing him peace, it was bringing him rage. He confessed to the elder monk, "I thought fasting would make me holy, but all I feel is anger." The elder smiled gently and said, "The anger was always there. The fast just removed your distractions." And this is exactly what adversity does. It removes our illusions and presents us with what we must finally confront. This is why adversity is not your enemy. It's your reflection. It's not here to punish you, but to purify you. Too many people define themselves by their achievements, their income, their status. But those things are all circumstantial. They can be stripped away in an instant. And when they are, what are you left with? That is your essence. That is your character. The man who holds on to his integrity even when he's lost his income. The woman who walks with dignity even when there's no applause. The child who shares what little they have. These are the souls that adversity cannot destroy because they were never built on fragile foundations in the first place. And yet not all adversity is dramatic. Sometimes it's silent. It's the slow erosion of hope. The daily grinding pressures of being a caregiver. The invisible grief of a loss that you can't speak about. The long, hard road of trying and failing, and trying again and again and again. These are the adversities that no one else sees, but they are just as real and they are just as revealing. There was a janitor in a large school. Let's call him Mr. Chen. Every day he came to work with a smile. He greeted the students he would sing quietly as he cleaned, and he often left small notes of encouragement on the classroom doors. No one at the school knew that at home, his wife was battling a terminal illness. That each day after his shift, he would rush home to care for her. When a teacher finally asked him how he could remain so joyful amidst such sorrow, he replied, "Because sorrow will have its place, but I get to choose where it can and cannot live, and it cannot live in how I treat other people." That kind of perspective isn't accidental. It is cultivated. It is watered daily by conscious choice, and that is the secret. Character during adversity is not the result of a single heroic act. It is the result of thousands of unseen choices made in the quiet moments. Even in ancient martial arts, students were taught not just how to fight, but how to endure. How to breathe when you're exhausted. How to move with grace even when you're under extreme pressure. Because in a real battle, it's not always the strongest person who wins. It's the one who doesn't lose themselves in the middle of the fight. In life, you will be hurt. You will be disappointed. You will be betrayed. You will be misunderstood. But these moments are not the end of your story. They are invitations. Invitations to go deeper, to release your illusions, to discover an endurance you never knew you had. And endurance isn't passive, it's an active engagement with pain. It's the voice that says, I will not let this moment define me. I will let it refine me. There's an old saying, smooth seas do not make skilled sailors. It's the storms that teach navigation. They teach patience. And most importantly, they teach what truly matters. When everything superficial falls away, you finally find out what you've really been building all along. And so, we have to ask ourselves not just how we respond to adversity, but how we prepare for it before it ever arrives. Because the time to build resilience is not in the middle of the storm. It's in the stillness. When no crisis is present, that's when you do the training. In your daily habits, in your thoughts, in your small responses. Adversity does not knock, it enters. And when it does, what will it find inside of you? There's one final story that speaks to this truth so beautifully. A wise elder was approached by a young man who had just lost everything: his job, his relationship, and all of his confidence. He said to the elder, I feel like a broken pot. There's nothing useful left of me. The elder brought him to a river and handed him a clay pot that was full of cracks. He asked him to fill it with water. The young man laughed and said, It won't hold anything, but the elder insisted. So the young man filled the cracked pot and walked back to the shore, watching the water leak out drop by drop with every step. When he arrived, the pot was nearly empty. The elder simply pointed to the trail they had just walked. Along it, a line of vibrant, beautiful flowers had grown. Every day, the elder said, I have walked this path with that same broken pot, and though it could not carry the water all the way, it watered the seeds along the path. You thought you were failing, but even in your brokenness, you were giving life. That is the final quiet power of character in adversity. Even when you feel weak, even when you feel cracked, even when you think you have nothing left to give, if you continue to walk with compassion, with discipline, with humility, your very presence is watering the world in ways you may never see. And so the path continues. Because with every trial we face, we are not just surviving, we are sculpting. And with every sculpted edge, a clearer, truer version of who we are begins to emerge. There is a certain grace, a certain truth in how a person treats others when there is absolutely nothing to be gained. No status to elevate, no advantage to secure, no applause to be earned. It is in these moments, these small, often unnoticed interactions, that the true essence of one's character is revealed most clearly. The true measure of a person is not how they treat those who can offer them power or favor. It's how they treat those who can offer them nothing at all. This quiet truth, so often overlooked in a world that is driven by image and exchange, carries a profound weight. Because the soul speaks loudest when it has nothing to prove. In so many traditions, there is this recurring theme. How you treat the least among us is how you treat all. The stranger, the elderly, the server at a restaurant, the one who stumbles, the one society has decided to ignore. These people become the unwitting tests of our inner life. And how we engage in those moments with sincerity or with indifference speaks volumes more than any job title or public statement ever could. There was a young executive newly promoted with a whole team beneath her. She was intelligent, she was driven, and she was eager to impress her superiors. On the surface, her performance was flawless. Reports were always submitted on time. She achieved her targets, the accolades were growing. But the janitor on the night shift could tell a different story. Every single night, she would leave her office in complete disarray. Empty food containers, papers scattered on the floor, coffee spills, never once acknowledging the person who quietly cleaned up after her every evening. One evening, as the janitor was working silently, she walked right by him without even a glance. The older man simply said very quietly, I hope your success doesn't cost you your soul. That night, something struck her, not because he was rude, but because he was right. She realized that in her relentless pursuit of greatness, she had completely lost touch with grace. And what is grace if not the ability to see the dignity in other people regardless of their role, to respect the person behind the title, the hands behind the work, the heart behind the silence? Children often show us what we've forgotten. One child might stop in a busy hallway to help another who dropped their books even when everyone else is rushing past. They don't calculate the value of the gesture, they just respond from the heart. And maybe that's what purity of character really looks like, before the world teaches us to filter all of our kindness through the lens of personal benefit. There's a Buddhist parable about a monk and a beggar. The monk, traveling through a poor village, saw a young beggar boy who was sick and completely unattended. The villagers warned the monk not to get involved. They said it was too dangerous, too risky, but the monk, without a moment's hesitation, carried the boy, bathed his wounds, and stayed by his side until he had healed. When someone asked him later why he did it, he said, "Because when the world teaches you to look away, the heart must remember to see." In our modern world, it's so easy to perform kindness when the cameras are watching, when the gesture can be posted, liked, and shared. But real character is shown in the gestures that no one ever sees. The kindness that expects nothing in return. The compassion that is extended even when it's inconvenient. The listening ear that is offered to someone who can't do a single thing for you in return. It was once said that the highest form of maturity is when you do something good for someone who will never find out you did it. That right there is soul integrity. We often speak of love in such grand terms: sacrificial, eternal, poetic. But what about the small loves? The ones that show up when someone is tired, when someone feels forgotten, when someone has failed? What about the quiet love that holds the door open, that asks, "No, really, how was your day?" That remembers your name when no one else does? There's a story about a man named Elias. He ran a small coffee cart in a busy city. Every day, professionals, students, and tourists would line up for their caffeine fix. Most of them came and went without ever really noticing the man behind the cart. But there was one woman who every morning would greet him with a warm smile, ask about his family, and once even brought him a scarf in the middle of winter. Years later, after she had passed away, Elias used the money he had saved over decades to open a scholarship fund in her name. When he was asked why, he simply said, "She was the first person who saw me, not the coffee, me." Sometimes all a person really wants is to be seen. Not for their utility, not for what they can offer, but simply as a fellow human being, another soul navigating the complexities of life. And to give that recognition, that single moment of dignity, is to offer something far more valuable than gold. In martial arts, one of the first things you learn is that respect is not earned by power alone. The bow, the gesture of humility, the way you treat your opponents, these are just as important as your technique. Because the spirit of the practice is not about domination. It's about discipline and honor. You are taught to respect those above you, those beside you, and those beneath you, not based on their skill level, but based on your shared humanity. And this principle extends far beyond the dojo. The driver who cuts you off in traffic, the employee who makes a mistake, the stranger who doesn't speak your language, the homeless man asking for spare change. How do you respond in those moments? With irritation, with dismissal, or with presence? The moment you think that someone is beneath you is the exact moment that your own development comes to a halt. Because in judging others, we often reveal more about our own limitations than we do about theirs. There's a concept in Taoism known as Wu Wei, which can be translated as effortless action, or flowing with the natural order of things. It encourages living in harmony with the universe, not constantly fighting for control, but responding with awareness. Part of this harmony is recognizing the deep interconnectedness of all beings. No one is truly separate. Your action toward another person ripples out into the whole world. A harsh word spoken to one person may echo and contribute to someone else's despair. A small, kind gesture may plant a seed in a garden you will never get to see. The best people, the people with the deepest character, carry this awareness with them. They understand that every single encounter is an opportunity to offer presence, respect, and compassion. Not because the other person deserves it, but because that is who they have chosen to be. There's a tale told by travelers in Japan of a bus driver who would greet every single passenger with a bow and a smile. Rain or shine, late or early, rich or poor, it didn't matter. One day a regular rider asked him, "Why do you treat everyone exactly the same?" The driver replied, "Because I do not know what burdens they carry, but I know they carry them, and my greeting may be the only honor they receive all day." We do not always know what other people are going through. The person who snaps at you in line at the store may have just lost a loved one. The employee who keeps making mistakes may be battling depression. The teenager who is acting out may be carrying a shame that no one has ever asked them about. This doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it does invite us to offer compassion before we rush to condemnation. So, to see someone's true character, observe how they speak to those who have nothing to offer them. Watch how they treat the invisible, the marginalized, the forgotten. In one monastery, there is a ritual where the novices must serve not just the elders, but also the sick, the elderly, and the mentally unwell in the nearby villages. The task is not glamorous. It is often thankless. But the masters understand something critical. How a monk treats a frail old man who cannot even bow in return shows far more about his spiritual path than any chant or any robe ever could. And yet, there is another dimension to this. How do we treat those who have wronged us? This too is a profound test of character. Not whether we excuse injustice, but whether we allow it to make us hardened, or whether we remain human. The world will try to shape you into cynicism. It will try to push you into withdrawal, into tribalism. But true character refuses to be molded by bitterness. There was a woman who forgave the man who took her son's life, not because she forgot what happened, but because she refused to live her life shackled to hate. She visited him in prison. She spoke to him of transformation, and she said, "I see the human in you, not just the harm you caused." That kind of grace isn't weakness. It is a level of spiritual strength that few can even fathom. In the Shaolin tradition, one of the highest virtues is mercy. Not just mercy toward others, but also toward yourself. Because when we offer compassion to those who have nothing to give us in return, we also train our own heart to soften its own sharp edges. The one who can forgive and uplift and encourage others, even when it goes unacknowledged, is also the one who can sit in silence with their own failures and not drown in shame. So much of life is transactional. What can I get? What can I gain? But character lives in the non-transactional spaces. In the moments when no one is watching, when your kindness won't be reposted on social media, when your patience won't be praised, when your generosity is met with complete silence. There is an African proverb, "The true test of a man's character is what he does when no one is watching." And that test is given to us daily, not in grand acts of heroism, but in the smallest, most mundane choices. Do you return the shopping cart to the stall? Do you say thank you with sincerity? Do you actually listen to others, or do you just plan your next sentence while they're talking? Do you give people the benefit of the doubt? These are the grains of sand that make up the mountain of our character. And sometimes character is not about what you do, but what you don't do. You don't retaliate. You don't belittle. You don't gossip. You don't seek revenge. You simply choose the higher road again and again and again, even when it's the lonely road, even when it's the quiet road. A man named June once said that the greatest lesson his father ever taught him was this: if you want to know the value of your soul, look at how you treat those who can never repay you. Jun became a teacher, and every year he would spend one lunch break each week just sitting with the custodian staff. Not to be noticed, but just to be present. He said, "If I only sit with those at my level, I will always stay at my level." Elevation doesn't come from job titles. It comes from depth. And depth is built in the way you treat the invisible threads that hold our world together. And so the thread continues. Because in each interaction, you are not just responding to another person. You are shaping your own soul. You are writing your own legacy. Not the one that will be etched on a stone, but the one that is carved into the hearts of others, silently, powerfully, and permanently. It's not just about observing others. It's about evaluating ourselves. How do you act when you're in control? How do you respond when you're in a crisis? Because maybe, just maybe, this message isn't really about spotting character in other people. Maybe it's about building it in you. The world doesn't need more performers. It needs more truth bearers, more soul keepers, more people who understand that true strength isn't found in domination or in self-pity, but in discipline and in grace. So, I challenge you today, don't just look at what people say. Don't just believe what they post online. Look at how they handle the small moments. Look at how they live when no one is applauding. Look at who they become when life stretches them to their limit. Because that, my friends, is where true character is born. And when you start living from that place, you don't just change your relationships. You transform your entire destiny. Thank you.